Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Egypt's High Court dissolves parliament 2 days before the presidential elections. As the rhetoric intensifies, the Syrian conflict nears global proxy war. And a look at Gaza after 5 years of Hamas rule and Israeli siege. Mosaic, world news from the Middle East begins now.
Egypt's Supreme Constitutional Court dissolved parliament and confirmed the presidential runoff elections will be held on time. Our correspondent Muna Ashmawi reports from Cairo.
Even the fate of the 100-member constituent committee that Parliament approved is also under threat since it was founded by a now-dissolved Parliament. Although Egyptians have long waited for the formation of this committee tasked with drafting the constitution, everything is moving in the opposite direction. Things are faltering and the people can't differentiate between the starting and end points.
The ruling that the disenfranchisement law is unconstitutional was expected, of course, since the judiciary is not independent. So obviously it will issue a verdict in favor of the government and the person supported by the regime, and that is Ahmed Shafiq.
What will happen in Egypt in the next few hours as it faces an uphill battle for democracy and an ongoing revolution in the square? And with so many issues to protest, the revolution is uncertain about what it must protest now. However, the struggle between Egypt's judges and the dissolved parliament seems ongoing after parliament insulted and defamed the Egyptian judiciary and Judge Ahmed Rifat, who presided over Mubarak's case. This led the chairman of the Union of Judges to respond in kind as the battle continues between the legislative and judicial powers.
We did not elect a parliament to bring people together to insult and defame the judicial bodies or cross their boundaries.
There are people waiting for revenge. The Brotherhood, the Salafis, and even the revolutionaries said they will take to the street and hold sit-ins. The country will be devastated if Shafiq becomes president.
هم طبعا الفريق شفيق زي ما سمعتي معايا لما كنا بنسمع المؤتمر الصحفي.
As you heard, Shafiq said in the press conference that the freedom to protest is granted and that freedom of expression is granted. So let them go to Tahrir. It is their right. They have the right to disagree, but destruction is not their right.
تخريب بقى اللي مش حق من حقه.
إجراءات حاسمة وتدابير قاسية في معركة انتخابية رئاسية شرسة.
There are strict procedures and harsh measures in a fierce presidential election that will determine Egypt's fate in the next 4 years. Calls to postpone these elections or even keep the winner in power for just 1 year were all in vain. The race is continuing despite all these conditions, a race that revolutionaries feel is determined in secret while nothing has changed.
ولم يتغير أي شيء.
The next few days are critical for Egypt. Ahmed Shafiq's team is still in the presidential race. As for a third of the members of the People's Assembly, they are no longer in parliament, both constitutionally and judicially. So by law, the work of parliament has been halted. As for the Egyptian people, they are still unsure whether to choose the Brotherhood or the military, or sit at home to watch and observe the elections as though they were happening in another country. The situation can be summed up with the Egyptian saying, "No one is worse than my grandmother than my grandfather." Muna Ashmawi, New TV, Cairo.
"14 people were injured in a car bombing in the area of Saida Zainab, peace be upon her, a southern suburb of Damascus, the Syrian capital. International observers inspected the town of El Haffa that witnessed clashes between the army and gunmen. Meanwhile, China rejected France's call to make the Annan Plan obligatory by invoking the United Nations Chapter 7 provision.
In light of the on-the-ground developments of the Syrian crisis and as clashes continue between armed groups and government forces while a political solution is still lacking, the positions of European and world capitals have differed on the situation in Syria.
China does not approve of using pressure and sanctions to resolve the crisis in Syria. We reiterate our support for the mediation efforts exerted by UN envoy Kofi Annan.
Through UN spokesman Martin Isurki, the international organization expressed fear that a civil war in Syria will not only impact Syria, but also the countries of the region.
It's clear that it's not.
It's clear that it's not for us to determine or formally characterize the nature of the conflict in Syria. The Secretary-General himself has spoken about the dangers of an escalation of this crisis, not just for the country itself, not just for Syria, but for the region.
In contrast to the UN position expressing concern over the eruption of a civil war in Syria, France's position explicitly urged an escalation of the situation in order to topple the regime. It also threatened to impose harsh sanctions on Syria.
The opposition groups must understand that the only future lies in resistance. It is time to make a decision. They should jump off the ship. The situation in Syria is critical and heading towards a civil war. We need to push the UN Security Council further and place the Kofi Annan plan under Chapter 7. This means the plan will be mandatory under the threat of tougher sanctions.
The American position was consistent with the French and British calls to intensify sanctions on Syria. The U.S. also expressed dissatisfaction with Moscow's rejection of a foreign intervention to solve the Syria crisis.
Russia says it wants peace and stability restored, and it also claims to have vital interests in the region and relationships that it wants to continue to keep. They put all of that at risk if they do not move more constructively right now.
In the latest development on the ground in Syria, a bomb exploded near the shrine of Sayyida Zainab, peace be upon her. The Syrian army announced its control of Al-Hafa area in the countryside of Latakia after heavy clashes erupted with armed groups. Damascus called on the international observers to visit the region to inspect the situation there. The Syrian government also declared the Haritan region in the countryside of Aleppo free of armed groups. Meanwhile, the neighborhoods of Bab al-Siba and al-Mawreja in the city of Homs are calm after the Syrian military forces managed to cleanse them of armed groups, paving the way for reconstruction and rebuilding.
Today marks the 5th anniversary of Hamas's control of the Gaza Strip, following an internal battle with its opponent Fatah that lasted many months and shaped the beginning of the Palestinian political division. Attempts to remedy this division continue today. It also paved the way for an economic blockade by Israel on Gaza's crossings, the price of which is being paid by Gaza's residents. Shahd al-Kashif reports.
Around this time 5 years ago, Hamas settled its security and political differences with its opponent, Fatah, with the use of weapons. Since then, Hamas has controlled the Gaza Strip with its own security services and sovereign institutions. To some, it seemed not only a political, but a geographic split from the Palestinian Authority under the leadership of Mahmoud Abbas. In the ceremony, a new class of police officers graduated from the police academy established by Hamas. According to its security doctrine, it holds a different mission from the one pursued by the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah, which is based on the principle of security cooperation with Israel, a doctrine many fear would establish an unchangeable reality, even if reconciliation with Fatah occurs.
No reconciliation with secularism, no reconciliation with any ideology except for Islam. This is the chance for you to come and learn in our academy how to protect our front line and how to become God's soldiers, not soldiers for America or the Zionists or the hypocrites.
Gaza's streets seem calm after 5 years of Hamas's rule. There are no armed clashes with its opponents on its streets, and no military confrontations with Israel on its border. The security contributed, even if slightly, to the creation of investment opportunities while living under siege.
Hamas founded a system in the Gaza Strip and established the rule of law and restored the Palestinian Security Services Authority. This, of course, required the formation of different security services with a different security doctrine founded on belonging to this nation and the exclusion of security cooperation.
Has the dignity of the Palestinian citizen been attained? Here, partial accomplishments and partial failures are not counted as long as there is major failure called division that operates in Israel's interests.
Hamas's attempts to end the legitimacy of smuggling goods and fuel, collecting taxes, and encouraging local investments in the fields of agriculture and construction did not ease the pressure of the siege, which is eroding Gaza's body and its poor, according to international organizations.
Before the siege, we used to provide rations to around 150,000 people. Today we provide rations to 750,000 Palestinian refugees. We used to look for people to give aid to. Now people stand in lines in front of ration centers. If these conditions continue, the situation will worsen for the people in Gaza and its neighbors.
حماس في غزة لديها حكومة وأجهزة أمنية وسلطات ونقابات وبلديات.
Hamas in Gaza has a government, security services, authorities, syndicates, municipalities, and over 300,000 employees. It faces difficult questions as it searches for their answers in light of a future political agreement with Fatah if reconciliation were to happen. Shukti Al-Kashif, BBC, the Gaza Strip.
While the Israeli siege of the Gaza Strip enters year 6, a group of 50 international aid and rights organizations are calling on Israel to end the blockade immediately. International organizations including Amnesty International, Oxfam, along with UN rights bodies, say the siege goes against international law. With the blockade, Israel controls what and who goes in and out of the coastal territory, including basic supplies. Over 1.6 million people, more than half of them children, are living under the blockade. The blockade has caused a humanitarian crisis in the coastal strip. Recurrent power outages made football fans watch the Euro 2012 in cafes with the help of power generators. But the main problem is blackouts in hospitals that put the lives of patients at great risk. On this day, Israeli forces made an incursion into the town of Khan Younis in the Gaza Strip, injuring 2 people and demolishing a house. Iran says it's arrested the assassins of its nuclear scientists. In a statement, Iran's intelligence ministry said it captured the assassins of 3 of the 4 nuclear experts murdered in recent years. Tehran blames Israel and the U.S. for the wave of assassinations in the country. It's also accused the UN Security Council of allowing Tel Aviv to commit crimes against sovereign states with complete impunity. The most recent assassination took place in January this year, in which nuclear scientist and university professor Mustafa Ahmadi Roshan was killed.
Libya's Supreme Court ruled a law passed by the National Transitional Council was unconstitutional. The law criminalizes the glorification of Gaddafi and his ideas and punishes with a prison sentence anyone who harms the February 17th revolution.
The court's ruling ended the debate between the law's opponents and proponents. Some viewed the law as a restoration of the former regime's tools of governance, while others considered it a rupture with the Gaddafi era.
The National Transitional Council passed a law called Criminalizing the Glorification of the Tyrant, written by Libyan lawmakers. It caused wide controversy in the street and the judiciary, in addition to local and foreign human rights organizations. The law punishes with a prison sentence anyone who disseminates propaganda in praise of Muammar al-Gaddafi, his regime, his ideas, his children, or depicts him as a hero. The law also criminalizes anyone who publishes anything that could harm the February 17th revolution. Many legal and human rights organizations challenged the law at the Supreme Court, viewing it as a replica of the Gaddafi regime's rules. These organizations also believe the law harms general and political freedoms in the country. The court's ruling that the law is unconstitutional was seen as a historic victory for its opponents.
The law reproduces what was known as insulting the leader of the revolution in the past, which provides a form of protection and immunity against the transition and against personal and public opinions. It was presented to the people in the wrong manner, but right now the court rectified this mistake through the Constitution. This is a good result for freedom of speech.
Opponents of the law believe it restrains freedom and restores the former regime's tools. On the other hand, its proponents view the law as necessary to cut ties with the past. Both opponents and supporters of the law say their goal is to protect the revolution. Supporters of the law stressed it is important not to grant freedom of movement and expression to those they refer to as Gaddafi's thugs. They say the bloodshed and the Gaddafi regime's actions during last year's war, as well as the way he ruled the past decades, are documented, not mere points of view.
We are here to object, and we hope that all Libyans will stand with us, so no one thinks they can glorify the tyrant, so they consider their decision long and hard before they do, and fear going to prison. Of course we reject this decision.
Gaddafi's ghost still haunts Libya and casts a heavy shadow on the political scene in the post-revolution and nation-building phase. However, human rights advocates confirm the form and content for building their country in the coming phase should not use prisons as a tool to scare and terrorize the population.
Israel's crackdown on illegal migrants is stepping up. As many as 500 South Sudanese have already been detained and will be deported back to their country of origin next week. But despite Israel's tightened policy on illegal infiltrators, the influx continues, as we hear in this report from IBA's Aaron Viner.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced that the flow of migrants illegally crossing the border into Israel will be stopped completely within just months once the border fence with Egypt is completed. Netanyahu noted that the state is working at full speed to build and expand existing detention facilities as part of the ongoing mission to apprehend and return an estimated 62,000 African migrants to their countries of origin. Over the past few days, the O's immigration unit has already arrested at least 270 migrants, and 300 South Sudanese have surrendered themselves voluntarily. Netanyahu also reminded the nation that the Knesset is set to pass legislation enacting harsher penalties for those who employ the homeless Africans. Despite the Prime Minister's statements of stepped-up action to stem the tide of infiltrators, Channel 1 reporter Biko Atwan yesterday witnessed firsthand Israel's apparently ambiguous revolving-door policy on migrants. Due to overcrowding at current detention centers, migrants are released after receiving free bus tickets. This bus driver said that he makes 2 trips a day, ferrying nearly 200 Africans from the Tsaronim prison in the south of the country to Beersheba's central bus station en route to Tel Aviv.
Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv. Yes, Tel Aviv.
I want to come here for a long time, so I didn't get the chance. Now I'm here. I'm going on my way to Tel Aviv, so I'm really happy.
And while 2,000 migrants already in the country are set to be arrested ahead of their potential deportation each month, a nearly identical number are expected to infiltrate Israel during that same time period. Officials at the Ketziot Detention Center have cautioned that the renovations now underway to expand the facility will not be completed in time to house the Africans rounded up by immigration police just this week. Human rights organizations continue to press the government to grant many of the migrants refugee status, claiming that their lives would be endangered if they were forced to return to their native lands. So for now, the flow continues.
I can fit anything because the place where I came now, it was worse, very worse. So here, maybe it will be safer for me.
I like to live here, to work here.
This is Aaron Viner for IBA News.
The Israeli occupation forces arrested 9 citizens and foreign solidarity activists yesterday after cracking down on a women's march demanding the reopening of the closed Shuhada Street or Martyrs Street in central Hebron. The occupation forces also assaulted the press to prevent them from covering the event.
Efforts continue to be exerted to restore the Arab and Muslim features of Shuhada Street in the center of Hebron. Yesterday, these women, wearing the traditional Palestinian dress, peacefully marched with the aim of reopening the street that's been closed for 12 years.
We gathered and said we must open Shuhada Street. Everyone here longs to go to Shuhada Street, but the Israelis deprive us of this right. Those drunken cowards throw stones at our windows. They are injuring people. We're banned from entering the street. We long to go onto our street. This is Hebron's main road. They must open it. This is not up to them.
This scene was displeasing to the occupation's forces and its settlers, who assaulted citizens and foreign solidarity activists. They beat and arrested them, repeating their usual lies to strengthen their policy of racism.
There were a lot of soldiers. All of them were carrying weapons. They started beating us, and my friend was taken away. I don't know how to say this in Arabic, but he went over the fence and he hit me like this, and he slammed me against the car.
This march is part of the Third International Campaign's mobilization to reopen Shuhada Street. It is organized by the group Youths Against Settlements, with the aim of exposing the occupation's practices to the world.
This march was completely peaceful, led by women and women only, to expose the extent of the racism in this area and to reject the apartheid system used against Palestinians. It was also an attempt to cross Shuhada Street despite the depth of the occupation. But the occupation completely repressed this march. It repressed the rally, beat many foreign supporters, and arrested many of them as well.
In an attempt to conceal its crimes and racist policies, the occupation forces deliberately harassed the press by assaulting some of them and arresting others. Gula Jilani, Palestine TV, Hebron.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories. World news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.